Welcome to another Greyscalegorilla podcast. We have got a really cool episode for you today. We have got in our virtual studio Barton Damer of the studio Already Been Chewed, ABC. They do fantastic work, and I'm excited to have him on the show for a bunch of different reasons. But the main reason that I'm excited to have him on, other than the fact that he's a super cool guy, is that he started off sort of similar to me. He started off in the skate culture and moved his way into design and eventually then owned his own studio and he owns his own studio. And it's just a really cool story because he's sort of done it his way. He didn't end up going to a major market city like New York or LA. He did it all in a small town in Texas, and he's just killing it. And it's a really inspirational story for those of you out there maybe not working in one of these big markets, or maybe you're in a big market and you really wish that you could build a studio or work at a studio that values some of the same things that Barton values, which is teamwork, generalists over specialists. Just got some really interesting ideas on how he runs his studio and how he chose to kind of build a brand. And I think that's also a really important part of this story too, is just how he's able to build a brand that other brands are excited to work with. And it's just a really cool story. I'm excited to have him on the show. Hope you enjoy it. By the way, this podcast is sponsored by Greyscalegorilla Plus, and now, I'm not sure if you know this, but it's big news over on Greyscalegorilla Plus. We are now including the Everyday Material Collection with your subscription. So if you're not a member, go check that out. If you are a member, log in, check out those materials. Of course, they're near and dear to my heart because I made them, but check them out. We're really excited about it. All right, on with the show. Barton Damer, Greyscalegorilla Podcast. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Greyscalegorilla podcast. I am your host for this episode, Chad Ashley, and with me is a very special guest. I'm super excited to have this person on the podcast, somebody I've been trying to get on the podcast for quite some time. I think you all probably know his work, but hopefully today we're going to get to know him and his studio a little bit better. Barton Damer, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much for having me on, Chad.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's been something I've been trying to get this together for a while, and we're both sort of busy doing a lot of different things. And I'm just stoked that we finally were able to carve out some time and talk.
Absolutely. Yeah. Real excited to talk with you. And while we're at it, just super thankful for all the training and teaching that both you and Nick have done over the years. I'm definitely a student.
Oh, man. Thanks, buddy. That means a lot.
Yeah, big time.
Well, let's start off. For those of you out there that maybe aren't familiar with Barton Damer's work and his studio and all that sort of thing, I'm gonna give you the brief history, I guess. Or actually, you know what? I'll have you tell the story. It's probably way better to hear it directly from your mouth. But the Cliff Notes version is what makes Barton, I think, really interesting and his company really interesting to me. Beside the fact that they do incredible work, they're doing it all from a very small town, not a very small town, a small town in Texas, of all places. And that's a really unique thing. I think that in our industry, you tend to think of studios that are doing really high end, big brand work as somebody, maybe they're in LA, maybe they're in New York, Chicago, like these big markets. But what Barton has done is he's carved out this really cool niche of really incredible work, all doing it his way, really, which is really, I think, cool to be able to say, I'm not going to go into these big markets. I'm going to stay in the area that I love and really try to build something from the ground up. So give us a little brief history of Already Been Chewed and
Sure.
how you came up.
For sure. First, let me start out by giving a big shout out to the rest of the team. We've got an amazing team that's been strategically assembled and put together. So super thankful for them. And as you've probably noticed over the years, the work continues to elevate and we continue to push ourselves and really are just having a good time doing it. And enjoying all the advancements in technology that are allowing to push ourselves as creative people. So just super thankful for Already Been Chewed and where we are currently. We have 10 of us on staff here, and we will be
Wow,
10
10. I had
years.
no idea you were up to 10 already.
Yeah, we're 10. We have actually two people joining us after the new year. One person's on contract, right? Actually, both are on contract right now remotely, but we'll be joining our team after the new year. We were hovering around 9 for the most part of this year. Then we lost one person and are picking up two people going into 2020.
Nice.
So we are, kind of like you mentioned, we're doing all types of interesting and fun work, and we're doing it from Wiley, Texas, which is a suburb of
I love that
Dallas.
name, by the way. It's a great name for a city.
We are wiling out in Wiley, Texas.
Yeah. Oh boy, there's a shirt in there somewhere, I'm sure.
Right? You probably get it at the creepy coffee shop right next door to us.
Yeah, just for those at home, their studio is next to this insanely creepy, sort of like a touristy coffee shop with those places that have like scented candles and strange like mannequins everywhere. Like that's where they get their coffee. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Totally. And on the other side, you can't leave out the Wiley Opry, which is pretty awesome because every Friday and Saturday, there's about 80-year-olds that are lined up to get in that door.
Oh my God, what kind of show are they putting on at the Wiley Opry?
Yeah, it's country and gospel music,
Oh
respectively,
wow.
on Saturday and I believe Friday nights as well. So it's so awful that it's amazing.
That sounds hilarious, and I kind of want to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, yeah. So a little bit of the backstory. We'll be 10 years old this coming March, and so I actually started Already Been Chewed a little bit over 10 years ago, and it started out as a blog back when blogs were huge and pretty much everybody had a blog, and some of them were more popular than others. And so alreadybeenchewed.net is how it started. And I was doing everything from posting my own work to posting the work of other artists that were inspiring me, and was basically trying to become kind of like a curated blog for what's the latest, greatest, inspiration within the creative community. And so that blog did relatively well back in that day. And when it came time to start Already Been Chewed as a business, the Google ratings were already so good because of the amount of linking, incoming, outcoming links, and interaction on the website, that it didn't make sense to try to launch something with a different name because nobody would have a
Right.
clue what it was. So I
Yeah,
just
yeah, that's a good
transitioned
call.
it, kept alreadybeenchewed.net, but we go by alreadybeenchewed.tv. So started it a little bit over 10 years ago. And in the last 10 years, we've just been on this wild ride of kind of slowly and organically growing, all for the sake of creativity and just kind of looking around and saying to myself, okay, who could I hire next that would either one, relieve me of a responsibility, or number two, add something to the team that we either don't currently have, or things like that. And so, over the years, we've been really, blessed to be able to follow some of my passions, which have been sneakers. Hip hop is definitely part of my backstory. Skateboarding, of course, is huge. With what
Yeah,
I
let's rewind that for a bit. So you started off as a blog,
Yeah.
and I think our listeners are curious how you go from working on a blog, sort of a passion project blog, maybe showing your work, maybe, some things that you're into. How do you go from that to working on direct to client project jobs with pretty outstanding brands? I mean, you guys have done stuff for Casio, for Under Armour. I mean, just like a
Yeah.
slew of brands that I would kill to work on. And how does that happen? Was it a quick thing? Was it a slow thing?
Yeah, so the sneaker and kind of skateboarding and hip hop, I guess, inspiration from my past has kind of yielded itself into the brands, as you mentioned. So we've literally worked with every single major footwear brand, except for I think Reebok. But we've worked with Nike, we've worked with Vans, we've worked with Under Armour, New Balance, DC Shoes, variety of shoe brands. And so, anyway, to kind of go back to your question, it started, years ago. A lot of my connections have come from skateboarding and from the skateboarding industry. And so there was a time period before I actually started making the transition into full time where I was freelancing nights and weekends.
Freelancing at a studio or an agency or where?
So I was working at a place called RT Media Group here in Dallas for about 3 years. I had moved from Washington D.C. And during the 3 years there, the company was creating basically like stock imagery and short films for church organizations. And so I was working literally like 40 hours a week, really no overtime to speak of, no weekends or anything involved with that. And so I was able to freelance and not have it be like a conflict of interest with what the company I was working for was doing. So nights and weekends, I just started freelancing on just kind of random stuff. Anything from freelancing with other churches to freelancing doing skateboard graphics for local skate shops. It didn't really matter. And eventually it got to a point where I could fill my schedule and I was making good extra money for the family. But now I needed to see, okay, that's cool that I'm making extra money, but can I actually fill my schedule with anything that I care about or that I'm excited about? And so by having like the steady paycheck during the day, I was able to start being more selective.
Mm.
And so eventually I was working with different shoe brands nights and weekends and working with different hip hop artists, different rock bands doing concert visuals or posters, things like that. And it got to a point where the work that I was creating on nights and weekends was, getting features in magazines or other blog posts, or it was winning awards and things like that. And so actually in 2009, I won Digital Artist of the Year, named by Computer Arts Magazine, which at that time, Computer Arts Magazine was, at least in my book, it was the most amazing and inspirational publication.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the when those came out, it was like you had to buy those and like get the whole thing and look at them. I mean, that was like a great way to look at new design and things that was sort of like precursor to, well, the internet was around, but it was like that was the compote. What do you call it? A compendium or when you assemble a bunch of good crap together.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like it was like always inspirational to see that stuff.
Yeah, and so this was 10 years ago, and I won Digital Artist of the Year. And at that time, I was still, working my day job, and uh, I thought to myself, okay, this is kind of weird. Like my dream publication in the industry that I would love to be more a part of just gave me this award, and tomorrow I'm going back to work and no one really knows or cares what I do on nights and weekends. You know what I mean? And it did a couple things. It allowed me to get confidence, I think, because I started realizing, okay, well, someone's interested in what I'm doing and someone thinks it's decent,
Yeah.
and that's, I think, a big part of being a creative is you're just always seeking and searching for validation. uh,
Hmm.
And as an artist, I do feel like there's almost two extremes with artists. And maybe this is just me, so maybe I'm exposing myself here. Um, but I feel like as an artist, I'm either really confident and really stoked on the latest piece that I just worked on, or I'm like, I'm no good. I don't like, I suck. Like, look at all the people on ArtStation. Like,
Right, right.
and I feel like it's really hard to control the emotions between the two. And so, anyway, I think in
I think
winning
some
that
of that comes
award,
from skateboarding too. I feel like that there's that a very similar sort of vibe in skating where you want to make a trick and your friend maybe pulls it before you, or you wish you saw some trick in a video, and you're just down on yourself until you can learn it. And then once you learn it, you sort of are like, okay, I did that. I need to find the next thing.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that could very well be part of that. So it got to a point where working nights and weekends, I was now having to turn down what I consider some dream gigs and some inquiries. And so I was working. I got to a point where I was working about 15 hours a week, freelancing, uh, and I was making over 75% of my income at that time. So it started to
Wow.
make sense that, okay, if I could do this more than 15 hours a week, I would easily be able to far exceed, what I'm doing in 40 hours a week at the day job, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. So you had to make that. It wasn't a very hard decision, I imagine, to just decide to go this other route.
Well, the interesting thing about that is I actually loved my job and I loved my boss. Like to this day, he's a mentor of mine, and just the way he ran that company was fantastic. The way he treated us as employees, and I try to carry that over to what I do at ABC. So leaving that was actually very difficult because it's not like I was, hated my job and wanted out. It's not like I was a bad employee and just needed to be my own boss. It was actually a pretty hard decision, and it was one that my wife was kind of like, "Are you gonna do this or are you not?" Because she was like super supportive of it. But
That's great.
I was freaked out though because I was the sole income with five mouths to feed.
Wait, rewind that.
Yeah,
5 mouths to feed?
I mean myself, my wife, and three kids.
Oh God, you scared me. I thought you had 5 kids. What? That's insanity. All right. Well, that's. I mean, that's still pretty wild. Like three. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just like, whoa, dude, that's insane.
I mean,
Okay.
it's
So you had to make a tough call. You loved your job. You didn't necessarily want to leave, but you knew this was the best route.
yeah, for sure. And so, I had proven over 3 years or so of basically burning the midnight oil, freelancing, that the work was there. There was a demand for the work, and I was having to turn down projects that I would have considered dream gigs. That was part of the motivation. And I think one thing that really drives me and that made me not go out on my own for quite a while was I didn't want to launch out and just freelance and be working on random crap. Like to me, that wasn't interesting. The idea of freedom and freelancing or choosing to be your own boss, like none of that was super appealing. It was all really like, okay, what's the creative going to be? Because I don't want to just launch out on my own and be like designing for real estate agents and
Right.
whatever else could be out there. So I definitely didn't want to do this unless I could see that it was going to be creatively fulfilling. And even to this day, I will definitely tell people that I'm more passionate about what I don't want ABC to become than
Right.
what I do want ABC to become. And the reason I say that is because 10 years ago, launching out on my own, if you had told me that we would become a studio of 10 people working with, the shoe brands that we talked about, the, we've worked with the NHL, the NBA, Tiffany and Co., which is a super iconic brand. We've got a chance to work directly with Disney and animate Mickey Mouse, which was pretty wild.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that's a cool spot.
yeah, we got to work with Lucasfilms on a bunch of different Star Wars watch releases for Nixon. So if you had told me 10 years ago that Already Been Chewed was going to turn into this type of a studio or this type of a brand, I never would have believed you. And I think if I had told somebody that was my goal, they would have told me I'm crazy to try and do it from Wiley, Texas.
Yeah, I mean, dude, like that's I remember sort of first hearing about you and hearing about the studio and being shocked that you guys were doing this and working with these brands all the way out in Texas. And then we had been friends for a while, and I ended up going to Texas to do I think it was back when the Brograph guys were Brograph. They invited me out to do one of the meetups there in Dallas, and I got to spend the afternoon with you and your team at ABC, and it was pretty amazing. The fact that you guys
Thanks.
have your own building
Yep.
with ample parking, I might add, which is
Yeah.
not something to take lightly if you ever work in LA, New York, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, your group was like so tight and they were so nice, and just everybody was just so cool and very inviting, very warm. And I imagine that must start with you, right? Like you must set the tone for the studio.
I mean, whether you mean to or not, the saying "the speed of the leader is the speed of the team" is true. I mean, the we've worked with clients, and we've kind of experienced how they have toxic environments, but we felt like the CEO was just the nicest dude. It's just the people in the marketing department that are toxic. And after working with them over years and years and years, we realized, okay, the marketing team has come and gone, but the environment is still toxic. It's coming from somewhere, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so whether I like it or not, I think it does. It starts with me, it ends with me, and which is kind of a scary thought. So I'm glad that you felt that way, and I hope that our employees feel the same way, which I think they do.
Yeah, I think it was like pretty. It was just a cool day. Cool to actually see somebody doing that from that part of the country working with those brands. But for me personally, it was also interesting because I have a history in skate culture, as do you. So I sort of felt like a kinship to what you were doing there, and I've always appreciated your aesthetic. If you haven't checked out Barton's work and ABC and the fine team over there, I highly recommend checking out the link that'll be in the show notes and get yourself versed in there. But I got a specific question for you. So you're in this part of the country that I imagine there's not too many other companies like yours in the immediate area. Does that ever come up with a client? Do they ever ask and say, "Wait, where are you guys again? Are you? Well, I thought you were in LA." Has it ever come up, and has it ever been an issue?
It has never been an issue. In fact, we will go and take trips to LA, Portland, and New York. And there was a stretch of about 3 or 4 years where we did it once or twice a year. And you email clients and you're already working with them anyway. And then you plan your trip to, New York or whatever. And you've got a meeting, you're expected to meet up in person, and you get to New York, and the next thing you know, they email you and they say, "Hey, sorry, I'm going to be in London now, I just found out, but you're in New York City." And you expected to meet up with them, and so now you're just a tourist. And so we continue to work with them, and the in person, it happens, and it's happened, with some of our clients, but for the most part, we've never even met them in person.
How often are these clients ever requesting to come work out of your space?
Never. We did have
Never.
one time a client that wanted to just meet up for coffee, And this is
You're like, let's
interesting.
book some flights. We got a coffee.
Yeah, I could be there in about 3.5 hours.
See you in 2 days.
Yeah, but it is interesting and it's strategic. Me saying located in Wiley, Texas, on this podcast is probably the first time our location's ever been discussed on the internet. We don't put our location on the internet anywhere. It's not on our website. Like you won't find it.
So
Uh,
that's intentional, or is that just because, is it intentional because you're afraid they're gonna look at your address and be like, oh, that won't work, or are you just trying to not even make that part of the conversation?
It's both, right? So we don't have it on there. And so we will have clients that automatically, based off of either our body of work, our style, our client lists, they will just automatically assume that we are in LA.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's so great.
And we just kind of ride that and don't correct them if we don't have
Yeah.
to.
I was a CD at a company called Somersault in Chicago. We did something very similar. We rebranded and cut a new reel and did a bunch of stuff, and we deliberately tried to minimize the Chicago address on anything that we put out. And we got so many people thinking that we were from Switzerland or we were
Oh, wow.
from Europe or something. And it's funny how the work sort of feels like it's from a specific part of the country, and people will just like assume that, oh, they must be in LA or they must be New York or Switzerland or whatever. But it
Yeah.
is interesting. Oh, that's really fascinating. So you sort of don't call attention to it. But I think I want to rewind back a minute because I think what something you said there was really interesting, and I think this is important for people to hear, which is you really do take the personal in face to face sort of communication seriously. It sounds like if a client wants to meet, you don't make that an issue. You go meet with them.
Yeah, we definitely will. It's been very rare. Every once in a while, if we're about to agree to a relatively large contract, a client may say, "Hey, is it cool if you guys fly out here to kind of finalize, the details and meet each other?" But to be honest, that's in 10 years. I think that's happened twice.
Wow. But you are, it's not like you were doing like, you're going to these cities to what, to look for business. You mentioned that you'll go to Portland, you'll go to Los Angeles, and I forget what the last one you said. But are you going there specifically to drum up business, or like how often are you making these like excursions to go look for work?
Yeah, there was a stretch about 3 or 4 years straight where we would go uh, once or twice a year to all three locations. I would say LA maybe twice a year, and then Portland and New York maybe once a year,
Hmm.
and it was kind of just a roll the dice and gamble and give an excuse to hit up people and say, "Hey, we're in town. Can we meet up? And while we're in town, are there any other art directors while we're here that you recommend we talk to?" Um,
That's great.
and so that's definitely something that we've done, and they come and go. One story that's kind of indicative of how we are, I guess, doing things via the internet is, we had a meeting planned in person at Nike headquarters in Portland, and that was a scenario where we flew in town for that meeting. So of course we end up emailing everybody else at Nike that we know saying, "Hey, guess what? We've got a meeting with so and so. While we're there, can we meet up with you?" Right? And so we're just trying to book like any and all meetings of anybody that'll just give us the time of day, and we'll catch them up. Hey, guess what? We've got more people, we've got more render power, we've got more processing, and we just wanted to share with you some more of our capabilities. So that's kind of the goal for going to some of those cities.
Hmm.
But to give you an example, we got there, the meeting got canceled the day that we were supposed to have the meeting. And so I called back to Donnie, who was not with me in Portland, and I just let him know, hey, I'm here, and right now I've got no meetings whatsoever.
So pause there. Tell everybody what Donnie does at
Sure.
ABC.
Yeah, so Donnie's a good friend of mine from years ago that used to run a skate shop here in the Dallas area. And I would go out to where his skate shop was, meet up with all the guys that are sponsored for his skate shop, who I used to skate with, but I was older and not as good as them. And we used to all go skate, and then we would go out and have buffalo wings after we skated. And and that's how I know.
That sounds like a nice day.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and so we used to. That's how I know Donnie. And Donnie approached me a little over 5 years ago when the skateboard industry and skate shops were taking a financial crisis turn, if you will. And he could see the writing on the wall and wanted to get out of the skate shop that he owned. And so he hit me up and asked me, he's like, I'm a huge fan of your work. I'm a huge fan of the brands that you're working with. Can I do sales for you, essentially?
Wow.
And so Donnie is online, kind of scouring the internet, going after either brands that I tell him, like, hey, I would love to work with these people. I would love to work with these people. And then, of course, he has his own ideas as well and is going after things. And then we also have another person that's doing that with us, and her name is Arielle. And
Is she working out of the office or is she remote?
she is working out of the office. Yeah.
Oh, nice. So Donnie and Ariel?
Arielle. Yeah.
Ariel.
Yeah.
So you're out there, getting back to the story. You're out there without your meeting just canceled. You're trying to figure out, how do I make this trip worth it? Because you can't just go home like that. You got to do something while you're out there.
Right.
So you call in for reinforcements. In this case, Donnie, and everybody sounds like they need a Donnie. They need a Donnie to go out there and get the leads and get the names and like, here's who you gotta like reach out to. So
Yeah.
you reach out to Donnie, and what happens next?
He started scouring the internet and LinkedIn and hitting up everybody from either Nike or Adidas, and letting them know that we're in town and we would love to meet up. And next thing you know, that afternoon, I had a meeting at Brand Jordan, the Nike headquarters.
Wow, that's crazy, man. Nice
Yeah.
job, Donnie.
Yeah. And I mean, the internet comes in clutch, right? Like it's harder to
Yeah,
even get
dude.
something done in person.
Yeah. So that's what I think a lot of places, that hustle, man. It's about that, like, you're not, I think a lot of companies would probably just say, oh, my meeting canceled, I'm going to go be a tourist for a day. But
Yeah.
that drive and that hustle and that not resting and not taking it easy, but saying, okay, I'm going to make the most of this opportunity. Who can we get a meeting with to talk about what we can do and who
Yeah.
we are and what we're about? And I think that's super powerful. And I want to, you and I have talked a little bit about work and just how studios are organized. I came from a studio. I never was freelance, and sounds like you sort of came from that same world. You're not really into the idea of like being a gun for hire. You want to build something, a place, a brand, a team, and I really respect that. And I think I feel the same way. It's something that I've always felt really strongly about, and it's been a part of my life, my professional life too. But you and I came to a bit of a disagreement not that long ago on the subject of producers. Now,
Hmm.
I think this is a fascinating argument, and I really wanted to pick your brain about that and to bring people up to speed. And interrupt me if I'm speaking out of turn here, Barton. But like, so I come from a world where you have a fairly medium to large team. You have a producer working with me, the creative director, and then the team of motion designers, 3D artists, editors, whoever, working in that hierarchy.
Hmm.
And me and the producer work in tandem, hand in hand, throughout the entire project to make sure everything's going right and yada yada yada. It's a pretty typical sort of workflow. But that's not what you do, right, Barton? Like Barton, I think from what you told me, and I'm going to let you like explain it because I'm not going to get it right, but the way that you sort of run is a bit more, I guess, DIY or run and gun, and you tend to take on a lot of these responsibilities yourself, in addition to being the creative director. So
Yeah.
tell me a bit about that, how that happened, and why you think that's a good way to work.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess as a disclaimer, I've never worked for another studio. The place I worked before was creating stock media for churches. Uh, I don't know what it's like to work for a digital kitchen or, insert your favorite studio name here. I haven't worked at a large organization that has executive producers, creative directors, executive creative directors, assistant art directors. I don't know that world, and I don't fully understand what each of those positions do. And
I don't
so,
either, and I was in that.
well, and to that point, there is a lot of doom and gloom being cried upon our industry, from some of the OG studio owners. And I can understand why. They were doing $1 million 30-second spots. And so they probably had all of those top heavy positions to pull off the projects. And um, just speaking quite transparently, no one's paying ABC $1 million for a 30-second spot. That'd be pretty awesome.
Need to get Donnie on that.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, with that disclaimer being out there, the other thing to keep in mind is no one that works at ABC has ever worked in that hierarchy either.
Oh
We
wow, yeah. So I guess they don't really know any different.
no, don't really know different, and also are very fearful of what we hear about that hierarchy.
Oh, interesting.
So none of us are super interested in that, which is why, I think we all have kind of bonded and have that common interest at ABC. Um, None of us really want to be part of that world. Um, and so as I have made decisions to grow, um, I would say some of the positions that I have chosen to hire played a semi producer role, but it was kind of like assistant slash do sales role.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that was technically a producer or not, but all of that being said, the position we're in right now is this. Um, I am operating as, business owner, founder of the studio, as well as creative director. So I'm heavily involved with projects at the very beginning. And sometimes that's either me developing a creative brief and pitching it to the client and getting sign off on that. Sometimes it's the client coming to ABC with a very rough creative brief and there's kind of a lot of gaps to fill in. And so I will work with them to figure out the creative, figure out the process and the contract and the budgeting and all of that. And then um, once that is in place, sometimes I am actually fully in the pipeline and I'm doing look development or concept animations as part of the initial exploration. And then, of course, I have a team, like I said, is kind of strategically chosen based off of various strengths and weaknesses and knowing what this person can accomplish and pull off, what this person can pull off. And so the position we're in now is I'm kind of playing that role, but then instead of either like an executive producer or a producer, um, I have what I call a head of production, and that's Aaron Smock. And so Aaron is a senior motion graphics artist, but he's been doing this for over 15 years, and he's at a point of his career where he's been through the ringer. He knows how to receive feedback from a client without, getting sassy with the client. Um,
Sassy.
he also is not coming to ABC to add a bunch of logos to his reel and then dip out and try to do his own thing. So he is able to not only be on the phone with a client and know exactly what that client is talking about and asking for, but he's then able to go to the artists and he's able to realistically know what's involved in order to pull this off for the client. And
Right.
so between myself and Aaron, we have a built-in ability to expand and contract our pipeline before we ever have to go to freelancers. So as soon as we get slammed, Aaron's in the pipeline. As soon as we're like super slammed, I'm in the pipeline. And
Right.
then and that allows us to keep our working hours from pretty much 40 to 45 hours worth of work per week and not burn out our artists, because at any given moment, he could be in the pipeline doing 30 hours and then his management is only 10 hours for the week. There's other weeks where maybe his management is going to be 20 hours a week, but it's very rare that, he's quote unquote producing a project 40 hours a week. And so he's billable hours, I'm billable hours. And then of course our team is billable hours, which keeps things really lean and mean. But more importantly, we don't have this awkward role of someone not understanding what's involved and then just saying, well, we just need to do it.
Yeah. See, I'm going to stop there because I think I'm going to make the argument that you have a producer, but it is just happens to be spread across 2 or 3 or 4 people. And I think that person is there. They're just, it's you. It's a little bit of you. It's a little bit of the person that you just talked about. And,
Yeah.
it's sort of spread out. And also I think that a good producer is not what you just described, is somebody that's like telling somebody to just do it because the client wants it. Like, that's not a good producer. Anybody can do that. Anybody can forward an email and be like, here's what they want, go do it.
Yeah.
A good producer understands the feedback, is able to disseminate it to either the creative director or the team, keep it on budget, keep it on track, keep it on top of the creative brief, and making it look good so everybody's happy with it. And I think that you work with one bad producer and it can just like ruin you, because you're just like, oh man, we don't want a producer. We don't that person's gonna tell us what to do and make us work crazy hours. I've been fortunate enough to work with a handful of like top notch producers, and every single one of them share a certain quality in common, which is their ability to keep their heads on straight and not lose their cool in situations where feedback or something's gone wrong, renders didn't come out right, whatever. Never throw the team under the bus, never throw the creative under the bus, but do a good job of balancing all this stuff. And that person exists. There's lots of these people actually, but it sounds to me like you guys, in my opinion, are sort of doing that. Each person may be taking on slightly different parts of that role.
Hmm. Yeah,
But
we
I would,
are. We're definitely sharing it. And we talk about it and we kind of look at each other and say, do we need a producer? Should we do that?
you
Uh,
will. I guarantee you will.
yeah. Yeah. And I'm not saying that I'm anti-producer. It's just that that person has not made themselves known.
Yeah, they're hard to find. I'm not going to lie. They are. When you find a good one, you tend to try to like keep them around, just kind of like your sales team. If they're
Yeah.
you don't want to lose them. And the other thing that I think, the reason that you sort of came into this workflow is because you're a business owner and you started this company from the ground up. So I never did that. Like, so for me, I wasn't familiar with contracts. I wasn't the owner of the company. I didn't really know anything about I don't know, like, hiring crew to shoot some live action and making sure everything's taken care of. I didn't come from that world. So I needed a producer. You just had to have a producer in a situation like that. But
Totally.
you coming from a situation where, you kind of, this was born and raised on you and your instincts and your ability to get things done and all that sort of thing. So I totally can see why you guys would be apprehensive or slow to kind of take on that role, especially if you're expanding and contracting, like you said. Like that's really cool, because I can imagine it must be pretty hard to find freelancers in Wiley, Texas.
Yeah, correct. Like if we're using freelancers, it's remote. And I mean, for that matter, everybody except for one person at ABC has moved to Texas. We only have one person that's from Texas.
So let me get that straight. 9 out of the 10 employees that you say you have all lived somewhere else.
Mhm.
You recruited them and said, come move to this part of the country and help me build something.
Yes. There's backstory. Donnie and Arielle are not. They moved into the area, but yeah, for the most part, everybody else I've like moved into the area specifically for the job.
Wow, that's great, man. So, I mean, are they all living within? Are they live pretty close to the studio, or how does that work? Do they go more towards? You guys aren't that far from Dallas, right?
Yeah, we're in a great area, I think, for being able to recruit people because you can really choose your lifestyle. So if you are younger or you just prefer the city vibe, you could easily live downtown in a very cool industrial loft and have a typical 35 to 45-minute commute going against traffic to get to our studio. If you wanted more of like a suburban lifestyle and you literally wanted to walk to the studio, you could buy a mansion in Texas 2 blocks away from the studio that was built 2 years ago.
Wow,
So
that's
you can
crazy.
really take your pick. You don't have to commute if you don't want to. But our team is coming from all over the place. Some of the guys chose to live literally within a mile or two from the studio, and they go home for lunch every day. They see their kids at lunch, and then some of our guys don't necessarily even live in the city, but they live 40 minutes away just because they liked a particular town here or there.
Wow, that's great, man. That's the thing. Like never, there was no studios that I could do that with, because all the studios in Chicago are obviously downtown. A lot of the ones that I admired in New York were in, proper Manhattan area, and then the LA studios, LA. So for me, uh, there was no way I was going to be able to afford a house in LA or New York and Chicago. Not even. I had to move way out into the burbs.
Right.
So the fact that there's like opportunities like that out there for artists that, maybe they want to be able to afford a nice house, like that's not that's pretty rare in this business, actually, unless you've been freelancing for a good number of years and built up, some monies.
Right.
That's really dope, man. Like the idea, it was always a dream of mine to be able to live really close to my office and be able to like walk in and not have to
Yeah.
drive. And
Yep.
I had that for a bit when I lived in Chicago, and would ride my bike, and I have it now because I work from home. But I think that's pretty rad, especially, and there's also, I bet, a lot of camaraderie in the office, because you've got this group of guys and girls who are just there because of the studio. And so what I imagine that ends up being is like a lot of people hanging out outside of work, and a lot of people
Yeah.
just, it's more of like a family vibe.
Yeah, we've definitely kept it that way, and you know, like I mentioned before, I kind of run ABC off of what I don't want it to become. My biggest fear in life is becoming the owner of a studio that I wouldn't want to work for, and
Hmm.
that's everything from the clients to the projects to the company culture. And I have zero tolerance for drama among the staff. So pretty much everybody has similar as far as personalities, in the sense that there's nobody high strung, no one's yelling at each other. Everyone's pretty cool, calm, and collective, and we all just really enjoy pop culture and being able to create stories around pop culture products, and a lot of similar interests, whether it's movies or video games or you know things like that. So
Yeah.
it is doing well. And we have had people come in and the culture wasn't quite the right vibe. And we had to, kind of move on.
Now, I mean, you got to be pretty certain that it's going to be a good fit before you have somebody move out there. Are you
Yeah.
doing a lot of before they come in full time? Are you doing a lot of contract work, or how do you vet people before you know they're a good fit?
Yeah, it's not easy, and I haven't always done it properly. I think that as far as artists go, honestly, we haven't had any issues hiring artists that didn't fit the culture. We were able to kind of weed that out pretty quickly. I think it's in some of the other roles that were non-artist roles, uh, where the company culture started to shift a little bit. But
Mm-hmm.
with the artists, there's several things. I go to these conferences. I was at Half Res recently and got to hang out with you again. I was just at Camp MoGraph. I went to LA Motion Plus earlier this year. And so the great news about being at those events is I am getting a chance to kind of meet people. And it was Half Res 2 years ago that I met Mark Fancher. And Mark Fancher, it was love at first sight. I mean, let's be honest. He walked
So
in.
who?
He
Tell me
walked
about
in the
Mark
room.
Fancher.
Yeah. Well, Mark Fancher, just super talented guy, super fun to work with, and literally knew nothing about him, but got to know him a little bit at that Half Res event, and he just looked and seemed like he'd be fun to work with. And then later connected with him on the internet and ended up uh, offering them a job. And but yes, to answer your question specifically, we do contract with people before we would ever consider like moving them across the country. And when we're contracting with them, we're looking for a variety of things. Like one, obviously, the talent has to be there, but then two, the speed. You know, can somebody create something that looks amazing and post it on their Instagram feed? Sure, but how long did it take them? And
Right.
then are they diverse in what they can create, or is it like, no, this is like a one trick pony? They're able to do this thing and this thing they do daily and they post it. And so I think finding out someone's range, it's an expensive process because obviously I'm not going to be the guy that asks someone to do free work just to prove that they are who they say they are. So I end up paying a lot of people, and then we get 2 3 days into a project with them and it's like
Yeah, it's a gamble.
yeah, and it's better than moving them across country, but you get it's not cheap to vet people. And the other thing too is like, okay, sure, you might be insanely talented, but are you good to work with, like attitude wise?
Right.
Am I going to be cringing and stressed out anytime I have to ask you to change something? Because like
Yeah, that would not fly with me at all.
I can't deal with that. Like sometimes the feedback's coming from the client, sometimes it's coming from me, and you might not know.
Yeah,
So
yeah. No, we ran the same way, dude. Like I would have sometimes more notes than the client would have, and that they have to be okay with that.
yeah, and it's like I just think that my own challenge is I have to be so good at what I do that even if the client has this seemingly lame request, I'm going to find a way to do it in a cool way or an awesome way and make it amazing. And then the client feels like their idea was awesome. You know what I mean? But that's that's the challenge,
That's some
right?
serious magic right there.
It's like, but it happens, right? How many times have you received a request that you think is going to be awful and it's probably going to ruin the project, but you do it anyway just to see if to show the client, and then you're hoping that once you show the client, they'll be like, oh yeah, that was a bad idea. But as you do it, it has surprised us, and we're like, oh wow, that actually was a good idea. Cool.
Oh yeah, that's rare though. I feel like
Yeah.
the more often than not, you just want to like talk them out of the bad idea
Yeah.
or show it to them quickly so that you're not wasting a bunch of time trying
Yes.
to explore this idea that's going to ruin everything. And then, yeah, you're right. There's the rare occasion where you look at it from a slightly different perspective and you can kind of find a way to make it work. And then ultimately everybody wins. But yeah, I mean, as we sort of wind up here, I wanted to ask you specifically for all the people out there that are looking for work or maybe thinking about a change or whatnot. What are you looking for in an artist that you hire full time at your studio? Like, what are the qualities? What software? What are you wishing they came in with?
Yeah. Well, we mentioned, kind of the good employee qualities, aside from being an artist, like
Yeah, don't be a
attitude,
jerk.
reliability, dependability, communication. Nobody likes to lose sleep or stress out wondering if you're going to hit a deadline. So just knowing, where the project is, and just being able to follow directions. Like it seems like it's obvious, but it's shockingly not. Um, those things will get you very far. Obviously, you got to be talented, but if you have those things, we can be a lot more lenient with a person. If they've got an amazing attitude and they follow directions and things like that, you can give them a whole lot more grace than somebody that just has a pretty big ego and is challenging to work with. So those may seem like they're very obvious things, but shockingly, they are not to many people. From a
Right.
skill standpoint, I think I'd be curious if you agree with this, but I feel like there's a gap in our industry right now, and that gap is this: if you started doing motion graphics within the last, say, 5 to 7 years or less, I feel like there's two types of MoGraph artists right now within that last 5 to 7 years. You've either got really talented 2D type of explainer video motion graphics artists, or you've got really talented like simulation macro shot Houdini type of artists. And in
Hmm.
the last 5 to 7 years, at least in freelancing with people, it seems harder and harder to find good generalists that can do just good keyframing in 3D, whether it's camera moves, whether it's, animating things with anticipation. To me, it feels like there's a gap of that generalist that can also, animate by hand and not just with simulations, but then also that generalist is able to do compositing in After Effects. And I feel like a little bit before the explainer video trend blew up, there were more motion graphics artists that could kind of do a little bit of all of that.
Yeah, I see it too, and I sort of attribute that to a bunch of different factors, but I also think that 5 to 10 years ago, the type of work that you would be doing out of studio or freelancing was so varied. You might have to do a live action composite job, green screen,
Yep.
augmenting with graphics or whatever one week, and then the next week it might be like a photoreal product thing, and the next week it'd be this or that. And I feel like now we're seeing a bit more of like a siloing of styles, and so artists aren't really getting to cut their teeth on a bunch of different stuff and have to like learn all these different things and sort of get good at everything. And they start to fall into these silos and only sort of perpetuate the same sort of work, which is great for a specialist. But
Yeah.
like to your point, like specialists are great, but they're not as employable as a generalist. And I agree. I'm really stoked about what we're doing at and what we're going to be doing at Grayscale Gorilla Plus, and hopefully starting to round out our what we're offering in terms of training and all that sort of thing, to hopefully
Cool.
bring a little bit more of that variety back into artists' work. But I mean, ultimately, it's up to them and the kind of work that they want to do. But yeah, I totally agree, man. I feel like when I was coming up, you had to know how to do it all. You had to know how to do,
Right.
you had to know how to model, you had to know how to UV, you had to know how to rig, you had to know how to animate, you had to know how to do After Effects,
Yeah.
title work, Christmas spots where you had to like figure out, okay, how do we lower third, what's the type going to be like? What's, you had to know typography, you had to know cameras.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that was part of the job,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that was just the gig.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'm afraid if we go too much longer, we're going to sound like old men shaking our fists in the yard, like these damn kids today.
Yep.
But I mean, like seriously, if you're listening and you're wanting to be more employable, you want to get a job at a killer studio like Barton's. I think what we're trying to say is that don't be a jerk, be really easy to work with, be willing to learn a bunch of different things and try to get good at all of them, and you will always have work. You will always be employed.
Yeah, for sure.
But anyway, well, this is a good time to wrap up, I think. Barton, I just want to say thanks so much for being on the show. I'm really stoked that you were able to get on. And I think we talked a lot about really interesting stuff. I learned a lot about what you guys are doing, and I'm stoked for what you guys are doing. And I'm just really, really happy that we got to do this.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on. Like I said, I'm a longtime fan and student of what you guys are doing at Grayscale Gorilla.
I appreciate that, man. Totally. All right, so be sure to check out Barton's work and everybody over at Already Been Chewed, talented folks over there. Their links will be in the show notes. I highly recommend checking them out. Barton's often doing speaking engagements at all the different various events. So if you look for him on online, I'm sure you can find his next event. Is there any events that you want to plug that you have coming up?
Man, I don't have any events going on, man.
And the one time after you're always at events and like the one time I call you out and you're not, well, you'll be at NAB probably, right?
I had to cancel NAB East and then New York 3D
Oh,
Motion
really?
Tour because we just have so much going on this month. So
Those are good problems to have, though. Are you going to be at NAB proper in Vegas?
I will, if nothing else, I will be there for the Beer House event.
Yes, you have to. So, for those of you who don't know, there's an event happening at the beginning of NAB every year. What was the name of it? I can't. God, I'm completely drawn a blank on the name of it now.
Oh, yeah, like the actual name of the
Yeah, the
meetup.
event. Oh my God, this is horrible. Anyway, look for it. I'll put it in the show notes. I'm spacing on it right now, but if you can get to NAB and get to this event, it's sort of the must go to party, I think, of the entire
Yeah,
conference.
yeah.
And for sure, you'll meet Barton and talk to him, ask him questions, see what they're up to. Thanks again, Barton, and everybody out there. I will see you in the next podcast.